Das Boot, German pronunciation, Das ʻboːt, English, The Boat, is a 1981 West German war film written and directed by Wolfgang Petersen, produced by Günter Rohrbach, and starring Jürgen Prochnow, Herbert Grönemeyer, and Klaus Wennemann. It has been exhibited both as a theatrical release and a TV miniseries, 1985. There are also several different home video versions as well as a director's cut supervised by Petersen in 1997. An adaptation of Lothar-Günther Buchheim's 1973 German novel of the same name based on his experiences aboard German submarine U-96, the film is set during World War II and follows U-96 and its crew, as they set out on a hazardous patrol in the Battle of the Atlantic. It depicts both the excitement of battle and the tedium of the fruitless hunt, and shows the men serving aboard U-boats as ordinary individuals with a desire to do their best for their comrades and their country. Development began in 1979. Several American directors were considered 3 years earlier before the film was shelved. During production, Heinrich Lehmann Willenbrock, the captain of the real U-96 during Buchheim's 1941 patrol and one of Germany's top U-boat tonnage aces during the war, and Hans-Joachim Krug, former first officer on U-219, served as consultants. One of Petersen's goals was to guide the audience through a journey to the edge of the mind, the film's German tagline Eine Reise ins Ende des Verstandes, showing what war is all about. Produced with a budget of $32 million, about $18.5 million, equivalent to €34 million 2021, the film's high production cost ranks it among the most expensive films in German cinema, but the film was a commercial success and grossed $84.9 million worldwide, equivalent to $220 million in 2020. Columbia Pictures released both a German version and an English-dubbed version in the United States theatrically through their Triumph Classics label, earning $11 million. The film received highly positive reviews and was nominated for 6 Academy Awards. 2 of these nominations, for Best Director and Best Adapted Screenplay, went to Petersen himself. He was also nominated for a BAFTA Award and DGA Award. Plot: Lieutenant Werner is a war correspondent on the German submarine U-96 in October 1941. He is driven by its captain and chief engineer to a raucous French bordello where he meets some of the crew. Thomson, another captain, gives a crude drunken speech to celebrate his Ritterkreuz Award in which he mocks Adolf Hitler. The next morning, U-96 sails out of the harbor of La Rochelle and Werner is given a tour of the boat. As time passes, he observes ideological differences between the new crew members and the hardened veterans, particularly the captain, who is embittered and cynical about the war. The new men, including Werner, are mocked by the rest of the crew, who share a tight bond. One Nazi officer, one Wo, the first watch officer, is disliked by the others. After days of boredom, the crew is excited by another U-boat spotting of an enemy convoy, but they are soon spotted by a British destroyer and bombarded with depth charges. They escape with only light damage. The next 3 weeks are spent enduring a relentless North Atlantic gale. Morale drops after a series of misfortunes, but the crew is cheered temporarily by a chance encounter with Thomson's boat. Shortly after the storm ends, the boat encounters a British convoy and quickly launches 3 torpedoes, sinking 2 ships. They are spotted by a destroyer and have to dive below test depth, the submarine's rated limit. During the ensuing depth charge attack, the chief machinist, Johann, panics and has to be restrained. The boat sustains heavy damage, but is eventually able to safely surface when night falls. A British tanker they torpedoed is still afloat and on fire, so they torpedo it again, only to learn there are still sailors aboard. The crew watch in horror as the sailors leap overboard and swim towards them. Unable to accommodate prisoners, the captain orders the boat away. The worn-out U-boat crew looks forward to returning home to La Rochelle in time for Christmas, but the ship is ordered to La Spezia, Italy, which means passing through the Strait of Gibraltar, an area heavily defended by the Royal Navy. The U-boat makes a secret night rendezvous at the harbor of Vigo, in neutral, all-Axis friendly Spain, with the SS Weser, an intern German merchant ship that clandestinely provides U-boats with fuel, torpedoes, and other supplies. The filthy officers seem out of place at the opulent dinner prepared for them, but are warmly greeted by enthusiastic officers eager to hear their exploits. The captain learns from an envoy of the German consulate that his request for Werner and the chief engineer to be sent back to Germany has been denied. The crew finishes resupplying and departs for Italy. As they carefully approach the Strait of Gibraltar and are just about to dive, they are suddenly attacked and heavily damaged by a British fighter plane, wounding the navigator, Kriechbaum. The captain orders the boat directly south towards the North African coast at full speed, determined to save his crew even if he loses the boat. British warships begin shelling and they are forced to dive. When attempting to level off, the boat does not respond and continues to sink until, just before being crushed by the pressure, it lands on a sea shelf, at the depth of 280 meters. The crew works desperately to make numerous repairs before running out of oxygen. After over 16 hours, they are able to surface by blowing their ballast tanks, and limp back towards La Rochelle under cover of darkness. The crew is exhausted when they finally reach La Rochelle on Christmas Eve. Shortly after Kriechbaum is taken ashore to a waiting ambulance, Allied planes bomb and strafe the facilities, wounding or killing many of the crew. Ullmann, Johann, the second watch officer, and the Bibelforscher are killed. Frentzen, Boatsmann Lamprecht, and Hinrich are wounded. After the raid, Werner leaves the U-boat bunker in which he had taken shelter and finds the captain, badly injured by shrapnel, watching his U-boat sink in the dock. Just after the boat disappears under the water, the captain collapses and dies. Werner rushes to his body, and surveys the grim scene with tears in his eyes. Historical accuracy. As a Leutnantsorsi in the autumn of 1941, Buchheim joined Kapitan Lieutenant Heinrich Lehmann Willenbrock and the crew of U-96 on her 7th patrol in the Battle of the Atlantic. On October 27, 1941, U-96 left for her 7th patrol and joined Group Stostrup 3 days later. The next day, 31st of October, the group made contact with convoy OS-10. U-96 launched 4 torpedoes at a long range, one of which struck the Dutch SS Bennekom. The ship went down half an hour after being hit, taking 9 of her crew of 56 with her. Following the attack, the sloop HMS Lulworth arrived on the scene and forced U-96 underwater with gunfire. The U-boat escaped the barrage of 27 depth charges unscathed. The next day, U-96 encountered 2 more of the escorts, HMS Gorliston and HMS Verbena, but managed to escape again. The U-boat spent November patrolling the North Atlantic as part of Groups Stortebeker and Bennica, until secretly entering the neutral port of Vigo, Spain, and being resupplied by the intern German MV Bessel on 27 November. After leaving Vigo, U-96 made for the Straits of Gibraltar, with orders to enter the Mediterranean. However, late on 30 November the U-boat was spotted by a ferry Swordfish of 812 Naval Air Squadron and heavily damaged by 2 bombs dropped by the aircraft. Unable to reach her destination, U-96 made for the port of Saint-Nazaire. On the way she encountered the Spanish SS Cabo de Hornos, which returned from South America, after delivering a group of Jewish refugees to the Dutch colony of Curaçao, when Brazil denied them entry. When U-96's torpedo missed, the ship was stopped and her papers checked. On December 6, 1941, after 41 days at sea, U-96 returned to Saint-Nazaire, having sunk 1 ship of 5,998 GRT. In the film, there is only one ardent Nazi in the crew of 40, namely the first watch officer, referred to comically in one scene as Unser Hitlerjugendführer or our Hitler Youth Leader. The rest of the officers are either indifferent or openly anti-Nazi, the captain. The enlisted sailors and NCO are portrayed as apolitical. In his book Iron Coffins, former U-boat commander Herbert A. Werner states that the selection of naval personnel based on their loyalty to the party only occurred later in the war, from 1943 onward, when the U-boats were suffering high casualties and when morale was declining. Citation needed. Such a degree of skepticism may or may not have occurred. In support of Das Boot on this subject, U-boat historian Michael Gannon maintains that the U-boat navy was one of the least pro-Nazi branches of the German armed forces. Both the novel and the film had a much darker ending than in reality, where the U-boat returns to port only to be destroyed during an air raid with many of her crew killed or wounded. In reality, U-96 survived almost to the end of the war, the majority of her senior officers surviving as well. Similarly to its on-screen fate, it was sunk by Allied bombers at its berth in Wilhelmshaven in March 1945. Even though the beginning and the end of the film occur in the port of La Rochelle, it does not correspond historically. The submarine base in La Rochelle was not functional before November 1941, and at the time of the film the port was dried up. While Saint-Nazaire was the base used in the novel and where U-96 was based at in late 1941, The film was changed to La Rochelle because its appearance had not changed to such a large degree in the years since World War II. Moreover, none of the British fighter-bombers of late 1941 to early 1942 had the range to bomb La Rochelle from bases in Great Britain.